Asus is no stranger to aesthetic experimentation, but in the year of the bezel-less revolution, it seems that the company is more focused on delivering classic looks with refined internals to match. The ZenFone 4 and ZenFone 4 Pro are the embodiment of this approach. While their looks won't be blowing anyone away, they are classy devices with high-value propositions and a focus on photography. Previously, photo execution has left a bit to be desired, and while ZenFones have typically been fast, they've also struggled with issues of power efficiency. Today we analyze Asus's latest high-end offerings to see if they've made enough improvements to keep our eyes from straying to the competition.
As we mentioned, these designs err on the more refined, yet plain side. Both made with glass in the front and back, the ZenFone 4 comes in either black or white, with a subtler concentric circle design seen in the reflections of the glass, rather than etched clearly underneath, as we've seen in past ZenFones. The ZenFone 4 Pro opts for a mirror finish instead, on a space gray glass named Pure Black. Both devices are generally pleasing to look at, and feel light and solid in the hand. Of course, bezels as prominent as these look slightly aged these days, but we're willing to accept it due to their otherwise classy construction and respective price points. The ZenFone 4 and ZenFone 4 Pro both sport 5.5-inch 1080p displays, but there are some differences to note. For starters, the Pro uses AMOLED technology, which produces colors that are vivid and punchy, but rather inaccurate, leaning towards the bluish side. Max brightness was the biggest letdown though. Advertised at 500 nits, the Pro's display peaked at just 340 in our tests. On the other hand, the ZenFone 4 uses an IPS LCD panel, which creates more accurate, albeit less dynamic colors than the Pro. The ZenFone 4 also nearly doubles the Pro's max brightness, clocking it at an eye-searing 660 nits. Asus has done some renovation in ZenUI 4.0, which is built on Android 7.1.1. Herein, you'll find some streamlining as well as a few new features. We've never had an issue with ZenUI being slow or wanting for features, but these minor enhancements are certainly welcome. Aesthetic elements have become more uniform and generally more pleasing. While there are still a few hidden menus to root through, there's also some practical additions, like a more inclusive settings search, as well as a quick find feature for quicker access to internet search, recent apps, and contacts. Generally speaking, ZenUI seems to be finally coming together in a more accessible and singular design without sacrificing the deep UI customizations Asus has always offered. Asus has also added a few new applications to the mix. This includes an emergency contact alert feature called Safeguard, a game streaming application by the name of Game Genie, which facilitates streams to the likes of Twitch and YouTube, and a feature called Twin Apps, which installs 2 copies of your favorite social media apps to accommodate multiple accounts. In terms of performance, Asus has stacked the ZenFone 4 Pro with a Snapdragon 835, 6GB RAM, and 64GB of storage, making it the highest-end device on Asus's roster. The ZenFone 4 notches things down slightly in terms of specs, using a Snapdragon 630 with 4GB of RAM, but thankfully still 64GB of storage. Both run exceptionally fast and multitask quite smoothly. As usual, the company has done an excellent job in making the difference between a Snapdragon 835 and a Snapdragon 630 seemingly negligible in day-to-day use, and we mean that in the best possible way. Of course, a disparity exists when looking at benchmarks, and the Pro certainly makes shorter and more fluid work of intense gaming. Asus has integrated dual cameras on all members of the ZenFone 4 family, with the ZenFone 4 Pro using a 12-megapixel regular and 16-megapixel telephoto lens setup, and the ZenFone 4 utilizing the same 12-megapixel regular camera, but pairing it with an 8-megapixel wide-angle lens instead. Using these cameras is fun and easy, but the resulting images are surprisingly inconsistent. Indoor images on the ZenFone 4 are well detailed, though it does have trouble with color reproduction, creating desperately pale palettes in some scenes. Outdoor exposure is good, as is color capture, but low light performance was very average, not doing much to blow us away with its proclivity. The 8-megapixel wide-angle lens was useful to have on hand, but images produced from this setup displayed some distortion and underexposure, as well as an overwhelming tendency to let in movement. The ZenFone 4 Pro also excels in detail capture, and naturally shares the tendency to introduce noise as lighting dwindles. Unfortunately, it misses pretty badly on color reproduction, showing a higher tendency to produce colder, bluish images. As surprising as it may sound, we'd choose the ZenFone 4's camera over the ZenFone 4 Pro because of this, despite the two having the same main sensor. The telephoto lens on the Pro, much like the wide angle on the regular 4, was easy to use, but let in much more movement than the main sensor. Asus's depth of field mode makes another appearance, this time rebranded and retooled as a toggle titled Portrait. The goal, of course, is to single out the subject and apply bokeh to the background. This time around, the ZenFones use facial recognition, which is pretty accurate to properly trace the subject and selectively focus the shot. Results are much improved over the dismal and embarrassingly bad images produced by previous incarnations of this feature, but Asus still has some work to do. While blur application was better, you can still see streaks along the border where blur is applied to the subject or the background is sharpened. This isn't quite a perfect effort yet, but a big step in the right direction. 4K videos out of both ZenFones look pretty good. Details are sharp, but movement stabilization could be better. It seems once again that the ZenFone 4 edges out the ZenFone 4 Pro, capturing slightly better exposure and stabilizing the frame better. Calls came through loud and clear on both the ZenFone 4 and 4 Pro. We had no issue hearing our callers, and they had no problem hearing us, so thankfully nothing major to report here. Previously, we've taken issue with the underwhelming battery life in ZenFones, but this seems to have been addressed quite noticeably in this particular pair. The ZenFone 4 and 4 Pro both turned in respectable results in our custom discharge tests, but the ZenFone 4 lasted a full hour longer, dying after about 9.5 hours of continuous testing, compared to the Pro's 8.5. Recharge times on both phones were about 2 hours.
Asus has turned in another pair of solid devices, but without any killer execution or features to place them head and shoulders above the competition. Instead, each aspect has shown maturation in its respective areas, especially Zen UI. Previously a somewhat confusing and inefficient, though typically fast user interface, Zen UI has shown growth and refinement in both aesthetics and functionality, which has also translated to much better battery life. However, the cameras still have some kinks to be ironed out, like color accuracy and low light performance, which can certainly improve, especially on the ZenFone 4 Pro. All in all, the ZenFone 4 and ZenFone 4 Pro are both improvements over previous ZenFones. The ZenFone 4 in particular is a solid option at its $400 price point, so we're pretty confident in saying there's never been a better time to try a ZenFone, especially if it's the ZenFone 4. If the bezel-less look isn't your thing, but you still want flagship speed and refined looks, then the ZenFone 4 Pro is there for you too. But at $600, it's a tougher sell given that its camera performance can't beat its own little brother with the same sensor. I'm Corey Gaskin with PhoneArena, thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe for our latest reviews.